Good afternoon, everyone. It is July 11th. Going to talk about the counteroffensive operations from Ukraine a little bit, focusing on three areas. Really, I'm going to talk about one, but this is the three areas where Ukraine is conducting operations. Bakhmut, and really kind of south of Bakhmut as well, down into here. The western Donetsk, and then Zaporizhia. I know Kherson's over here, and they have some small operations going on over there, but really just going to focus on Bakhmut for this video and also talk about why Ukraine is conducting the offensive operations as they are, not seeing giant swaths of territory being taken, and what exactly they're trying to accomplish here. So as we move in on Bakhmut up here, that's the one I'm going to focus on because this is where we've seen the biggest potential gains when it comes to some of the geostrategic implications for the Kremlin, for the morale of the Russian troops, etc., implications that could affect the future of the war. So since January, the Russians took about 392 square miles of territory during their winter-spring offensive. In the last 6 weeks, or really 5 weeks since this counteroffensive began on June 5th, roughly, we've seen Ukraine take 253 square kilometers. And if I said miles earlier, it was 392 square kilometers by the Russians. 253 of those square kilometers have been retaken by Ukraine. So it took 6 months for Russia to gain 392 square kilometers. 253 of that has been taken back in just 5 weeks. The biggest gains obviously were in the south, but the most strategic gains are around Bakhmut. And what Ukraine is stating right now is they have fire control over the city of Bakhmut. So obviously, I'm going to zoom in a little bit more here because this is what we're focusing on here. Obviously seeing we have Bakhmut right in here. There's multiple ground lines of communication. What a ground line of communication is basically just a road that comes into Bakhmut. Here, and then over here, and then here. And what Ukraine is saying is they have fire control from the high ground over not only the city, but these ground lines of communication here. So they can rain artillery down at will onto these potential target areas, hitting Russians as they both move into Bakhmut to reinforce or exfil out of Bakhmut, whatever the reason is. The Ukrainians are saying they have fire control now, meaning that they have complete artillery control over the whole region here, which is significant. That is a major factor in the ability of what Ukraine is attempting to do, which is a double envelopment of Bakhmut. But nevertheless, the going has been slow. The going has been slow across the entirety of the front line. And as you can see, the Russian defenses, especially down here in the Zaporizhia region, are pretty significant. They have just multiple lines of defenses here in which the Ukrainians are having to deal with. I mean, the reports are some of these areas have 8 lines of defense deep, trying to block the Ukrainians as they move in. So the Ukrainians are facing this defensive system, and I will talk about what that looks like for them on the ground. So what you see here is a really crude outline of a deliberate defense, and this is what Russia is using against Ukraine. And this is just doctrinal Russian stuff. So this is Russian doctrine. Actually, this is many countries' doctrine on how to do a deliberate defense. So what you see is over here, you have where the attacking Ukrainians would be coming in, and they would encounter, first and foremost, pre-sighted in artillery. That is this red bubble throughout the whole area of where they would be attacking. This is a line of defense, one of those lines you saw. These can be as close as a few kilometers and as deep as 20 kilometers on the front line. So what they encounter first is tank traps. These tank traps, this brown line is right here, what these tank traps do is not only do they trap tanks, they make it so a tank can't cross them because they're just so wide, but those tanks that can have to come over the top of the other side of the tank trap and expose their underside to fire. These are trenches in this area right here. So this brown jagged line are trenches. So there's going to be anti-tank weapons in these trenches. So as the tanks come over the top, you'll see anti-tank fire aiming at the softest part of the tanks, which is the underside of the tank. As they cross over, tanks will break through. If tanks are struggling to break through, you may have ground infantry getting through. Then they hit concertina wire. Concertina wire not only stops troops, it also can get caught up in the tires and axles of things like Humvees and wheeled vehicles. And we've seen this before. If any of you have ever trained in the field and accidentally had one of your soldiers roll through a C-wire line, you know the pain that is caused by trying to get that off the tires and off being wrapped around the axles. All in the meantime, they're getting shot at by this trench system right here. So they have the tanks are getting caught in the tank ditches and the tank traps. Then you have the concertina wire, which the infantry have to deal with, all while pre-sighted artillery in this red bubble is raining down. It's very difficult. Once they clear these trenches, the Russians, the U.S., doesn't matter, in a deliberate defense, don't use just a single line of trenches. Usually behind the trenches, you have minefields. That's what these red dots are. These are what the Russians are having to, or the Ukrainians are having to go through after they clear the first line of trenches. And interestingly, a lot of the videos we see of them clearing trenches and then running into minefields means that they are getting out of these first lines here. They are breaking through, and we're seeing them having to deal with Dragon's Teeth. That's the next line. Dragon's Teeth from Russia, it seems like they have a mixed bag here. They have some that seem to be somewhat effective in forcing the tanks to push over the top of them or use some sort of engineering material to push through. But as they go through these minefields into the Dragon's Teeth, these are all meant to stop tanks. And a lot of times you need engineering equipment to get through these, or you need mine clearing like MCLIX. I think that stands for mine clearing line charge, if I recall, but that's just off the top of my head, which will clear out paths through the minefields and into the Dragon's Teeth. And you have another line of concertina wire and another set of trenches with infantry, anti-armor soldiers, and then behind them you have bunkers that provide all kinds of means of fire. So this is one layer of a singular defense that you would see in potentially most of the stuff that the Ukrainians are facing can be 3 layers deep of this. So 3 times this. In some of the other areas, as I've said, there's been some experts say that they've built layers as far as 8 deep. I don't think the Ukrainians are engaging in those areas, but this is very significant. Now, where a lot of countries defeat this is having air power. Well, neither side, the Russians nor the Ukrainians, have air superiority in this battlefield, so it's really a ground fight. We're trying to provide them with cluster munitions, which will work better against trenches, but it's not like it's the end-all be-all. These cluster munitions have the ability to penetrate into the trenches, but it's not a perfect situation. It's not like these are trench clearing weapons. It is designed to hit troops in the open generally, or hit armor through armor penetrating projectiles that float down and destroy them. It's not perfect, but it's much better than the standard high explosive artillery that they have. Also, you can somewhat crudely use cluster munitions to clear minefields. Again, it's not ideal, though. It's not the most ideal situation to use. Instead, you want to use engineering equipment to ensure that all the mines are cleared. You don't want to accidentally trigger a mine that you thought had been cleared by a series of cluster munitions, which, again, aren't a perfect solution. So cluster munitions are going to help, but you have to understand, the Ukrainians are going through hell on this situation. So their plan, and what their plan has been through this entire counteroffensive, is to attrit Russian troops in their trenches, to attrit them in their bunkers, to attrit them in their rear echelons, so that they can instead of having to fight them, they can have a minimal engagement and roll through these types of areas after pounding them with artillery, pounding them with rockets and missiles and things of that nature, and trying to break through in a meaningful way that will save as many Ukrainian lives as well as preserve as much equipment as possible. And as of for right now, time is on Ukraine's side with regard to that. So kill as many Russian troops as you can, then essentially walk over their corpses to get to the next line of defense. And that's what they're doing.